Hello friends, welcome to my channel. I am Shane Desai, and in today's video we are going to discuss the Shakespearean tragedy. So in this presentation we will discuss a little bit about William Shakespeare, his early life, what is tragedy, what is a Shakespearean tragedy, and also we will see the characteristics of Shakespearean tragedy. So in this slide you can see on the right hand side the picture of William Shakespeare, and under that his signature. So this is how William Shakespeare used to write himself. So this is the next slide. So before directly going to Shakespearean tragedy, we will see a little bit about William Shakespeare. Now many of you might be knowing much about William Shakespeare, but as a part of formality we will see a little bit about William Shakespeare. So William Shakespeare, who was a world famous poet, author, actor, playwright, dramatist and a writer, was born on 26th April 1564 in WHEREIN, London, England. So this is his time period, his timeline. He was born on 26th April 1564 in London, England, and he was a man of tremendous understanding. As you can see that he was a man with varied occupation. He was a poet, author, actor, playwright, dramatist and so on. He died on 23rd April 1616 in London, England. So this is the day when he was died. Third point, he was a son of a local merchant. His father was a glove maker. So this particular line or this particular statement is for his father, and this shows his father's occupation, that his father was a glove maker. His father's business was to make gloves. Fourth point, he is known as England's national poet and bard of Avon. So William Shakespeare is known as England's national poet. So this is the title given to him, and he is also known as the bard of Avon. Now bard here means poet, and Avon is the name of place, Stratford upon Avon. So basically if we translate this word, then it gets as a poet of Avon, right? Now fifth point, he got married at the age of 18 to Anne Hathaway, who was 8 years elder than him, having the age of 26 years. So this is about William Shakespeare's marriage life. He got married at the early age of 18 to a girl named Anne Hathaway. But the strange thing is that Anne Hathaway was 8 years elder than William Shakespeare. So by the time William Shakespeare married, he was 18 years, and his wife Anne Hathaway was 26 years old. uh, now this is the 10 tragedies written, the most famous or the top 10 tragedies of William Shakespeare, and you can find many other tragedies of William Shakespeare apart from this, for example Troilus and Cressida and so on, but these are the top 10 tragedies, and most of the people in the world might have seen or read any of the one tragedy out of this list. For example, Romeo and Juliet has been adapted in various films. So these 10 are the top 10 tragedies of William Shakespeare, and out of these 10, the last 4, King Lear, Macbeth, Othello and Hamlet, are considered as the greatest tragedy of William Shakespeare. So being a literature student, we must read these last 4 tragedies. Now moving forward, what is a tragedy? Yes, what does a tragedy? Now before understanding Shakespearean tragedy, we will have to see what tragedy means. In general words, a tragedy is a 5-act play ending with the death of the most of the major characters in the play. So in simple words, we can say that a tragedy is a 5-act play. Now this is a format. A tragedy must have 5 acts. Now there can be many scenes in one act, but the whole tragedy should be having of 5 acts. And it is a tragedy where we can find tragic elements. So in this tragedy there must be death. If there would be death, only then we will find tragic elements, or we can consider it as a tragedy. And death occurs of most of the major characters or the protagonist itself in the end, right? The word tragedy has been derived from the Greek word tragodia, which means the song of the goat. Now this is about the term tragedy or the word tragedy. So the English word tragedy has been derived from Greek word tragodia, which means the song of the goat. Now what does tragedy and a goat has a relation, like why tragedy is correlated with goat? Now in ancient Greek mythology, it has been believed that when a goat cries, or when a goat shouts, then something bad might happen, something unlucky might happen, or a tragedy might fall upon any person. So this goat is indirectly compared with tragedy or correlated with tragedy, and hence it is known as the song of the goat, because goat is considered as a tragic element in tragic animal in ancient Greek mythology. And the other reason is mentioned in the third point. The ancient Greek theater performers used to wear goat's skin to represent the Greek god Satyr. Now, Satyr is a Greek god, a lustful, drunken kind of god, and to represent this god, the ancient Greek theater performers, means the ancient theater actors, used to wear goat skin so that they could represent or they could portray themselves as Satyr, right? Now, fourth point, last point, when we specifically talk about Shakespeare's tragedy, it is believed that he followed Aristotle's concept of tragedy. Yes, now this many critics believes that Shakespeare has followed the Aristotle's concept of tragedy. Now, Aristotle, we can say at some extent that he is the founder or originator of tragedy, and in one of his most famous work, the Poetics, he has also given the definition and the theory of tragedy. So it is believed that William Shakespeare followed Aristotle's concept of tragedy. So this is Aristotle's definition of tragedy. Now, before going to Shakespearean tragedy, we must know the original definition of tragedy. Now, this definition will need a whole other video to explain, but I will try to explain it in brief. Right, tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious, having magnitude. Now, a tragedy is an imitation. Imitation here means copy of an action. Now, copy of an action which has been done in society. If we see around us, then we will find many person, many character in our society that those characters are suffering from problems and they are into tragedy. So in the tragedy itself is an imitation of an action out of the society. The action arises from the society, right, and that is serious. Now, yes, tragedy should be serious. Now, that doesn't mean that it should not have comic elements or comic dialogues in it, but the whole plot should be serious. It should not be that the whole plot or whole play should be a comic play, but there must be some element of comedy. But other than that, the whole play should be serious. Only then it can be considered as tragedy, and it should have a certain magnitude, a certain length, and it should be complete in itself. If we are talking about tragedy, then there at the end we must know by reading or by seeing that tragic play that yes, it is a tragedy because it is the whole plot is complete in itself, right, in appropriate and pleasurable language. Now, the tragedy should also have an appropriate and pleasurable language or pleasurable dialogue, which provides amusement and aesthetic pleasure to the audience, and in dramatic rather than narrative form. Now, the plays or dramas are something that is to be performed. It is not something to be narrate or to be read. So tragedy is a play, and being as a play or drama, it should be performed. So tragedy should be in a dramatic form rather than having it in a narrative form, and with incidents arousing pity and fear. Now, tragedy should also have these incidents like pity and fear, wherein to accomplish the catharsis of these emotions. Now, at the end, after seeing the tragedy, there should be the release, catharsis, or purgations of these emotions. Then only the purpose of tragedy would be fulfilled. The purpose of tragedy is to release or to catharsis these emotions, right? So this is the definition, original definition of tragedy given by Aristotle, and it has been believed that Shakespeare mostly followed this definition into his tragedies. And yeah, last point also says that Shakespeare mostly relied on this definition. Now, this is all about the facts of Shakespearean tragedy. Now we have came upon Shakespearean tragedy, so we will see what Shakespearean tragedy is. In Shakespeare's tragedy, the defeat, the disaster, the shattered hopes, and the problems in the life of the characters are not natural or just merely happens. So yes, the tragic elements, the defeats, the lose, the lost hopes are not natural. They are not just merely happen for the sake of happening, and it is also not the result of the wrath of God. It is not like in order to punish that particular character, God has sent a tragedy upon that character, or because that character has done something cynical, and God want to punish him, and for that reason that tragedy has fallen upon that character. It is not just like that, right? The second point says the same, nor it is been sent from the heaven, neither it is the result of the wrath of God, right? And the third point, but the problems or issues, the tragedy arises out of the actions of protagonist or one of the major character. Yes, the tragedy which comes upon the major character arises out of their own actions, out of their own mistakes, out of their own flaws, and out of their own decisions, right? It is not something that God has sent them to punish, or it just merely happened. The character was living a happy life and he was trapped into a tragedy. It is not like that, but due to their own mistakes and flaws and decisions, they put themselves into tragedy, right? And for that reason, this fourth point, which is actually a proverb, says that man himself is responsible for his own tragedy, right? Man particular, this is a very realistic proverb. Man himself is responsible for his own tragedy. Whatever we do, we are inviting tragedy upon us if we are doing such things, right? And fifth point, actually this is a comment made by a critic. Tragedy is a subject to struggle between good and evil in the world. Yes, tragedy is a subject to struggle. There is a conflict between good and evil. There is a contrast between good and evil. For example, let's take Othello. That we can find good and evil in the Othello. Othello is been portrayed as a good character, but on the other side, the antagonist Iago is been portrayed as an evil character. So there is a struggle between good, Othello, and Iago, good and evil. And in fact, it is the same thing in the world. A tragedy arises when there is struggle between good and evil, right? So moving next to this next slide. The sixth point says Shakespearean tragedy is mostly concerned with the persons of high degrees. Now this is one of the special thing. Like Shakespeare mostly portrayed or centralized the persons of high degree or high social status, right? For example, kings, queens, dukes, duchesses, generals, right? And it is not like that Shakespeare only is the writer from Elizabethan age who wrote his tragedy or the plays on the persons of high social status or the people of upper class, but it was a kind of trend. We can say that the poets and writers of this age were habitual to write on the people of upper class. For example, let's take Edmund Spenser, one of the work which Edmund Spenser has written, The Fairy Queen, which is actually dedicated to Queen Elizabeth. So it was a kind of trend, it was a kind of system in Shakespeare's age that the most of the plays and works written by writers are concerned to the people of upper class with high social status or people with high degree, right? Seventh point, and the dramatist here does not concentrates on the life of the ordinary people or the sufferings of the laymen, but it mostly focuses on the lives of the upper class. Yes, this is the same point. Actually, it is repeating the above point. The dramatist here has no interest with the issues, problems, strugglings of the common persons or ordinary laymen, but he is always interested and focused to the upper class people and the life and the problems of upper class people. 8th point, but the modern tragedies deals with the lives, sufferings, and the problems of the common man. So this is the biggest difference between Shakespearean tragedy and modern tragedy. So here I have tried to distinguish the Shakespearean tragedy and the modern tragedy. If we see modern tragedies or the tragedies written after the time of Shakespeare, then we can find that all these small character as well as the major characters, minor and major, both characters has equal role, has their own significance in the tragedy. But it's not like it is only centralized to the upper class people, but it mostly focuses on the life of common people, right? Now moving forward, so these are the characteristics of Shakespearean tragedy. Now you might find that some of the points are repeating, but I will try to distinguish as far as I could. So the first point is the hero's fatal flaw. Now yes, I earlier told, I told that the sufferings, the shattered hopes, the defeat, the ultimate death in Shakespearean tragedy are not natural, or it not just merely happens, or it is also not been sent by God, but it arises out of the action of the character itself. It arises out of the flaw or the mistake of the major character or one of the protagonists itself. For example, let's take Othello. Now, what was the flaw or mistake of Othello? Othello blindly believed Iago, who was against him, and Iago plans an evil plot to take revenge against Othello. And because of this, the Othello's flaw, we can consider that he blindly believed Iago, and never he thought to talk with his wife that whether she is committing adultery against him or not. And for this reason, he kills his wife, and due to that, tragedy falls upon himself and other major characters as well. So the fatal flaw of Othello here was that he blindly trusted Iago, who was against him, right? Now moving to second characteristics, introduction to the supernatural element. Now Shakespeare introduces some form of supernatural agents such as ghosts and witches in his plays, and these ghost, witches or supernatural elements are placed in very closest relation with the main character or the protagonist itself. The supernatural agents, we can also say that in Shakespeare's tragedy, has their own role in the life of the hero. And for example, the witches in Macbeth and ghosts in Hamlet mold the character of hero at some extent to prepare him for the tragedy, right? Third characteristics, abnormal conditions of mind. Now Shakespeare also represents the abnormal conditions of mind, and we can see that kind of thing in King Lear. Shakespeare introduces insanity in the case of Lear, and we can also see the abnormal conditions of mind in Macbeth. For example, we can see the element of hallucination and somnambulism. Somnambulism means walking in sleep. So this is nothing but these elements portrays the abnormal conditions of mind of the hero or the characters. And we can also see the abnormal conditions of mind in Othello also. The antagonist Iago wants to take revenge against Othello, and S.T. Coleridge, a famous critic, had also commented on the character of Iago in one of his essays, saying that Iago had motiveless malignity, means Iago didn't have any purpose to take revenge against Othello, but still he want to take revenge against Othello, and due to this Iago, at last many lives were killed, and that play turned out to be a tragedy. So this portrays nothing, or this shows nothing but the abnormal condition of Iago's mind. The fourth point or fourth characteristics, conflict and struggles. Now, as we have seen earlier, that there is conflict, struggles between good and evil, and without conflict we cannot consider a play as a tragedy. But in Shakespeare's tragedy, we can distinguish the conflict into two parts. The first one is internal conflict, and the second one is external conflict. Now internal conflict is something the character has with oneself, with his own behavior, with his own heart. For example, Othello. The Othello was a jealous person, so the jealousy portrays his internal conflict with his own self. Let's take example of external conflict. In Romeo and Juliet, we can find that Romeo and Juliet were having conflict with the society. The two houses were totally against each other. So this is nothing but external conflict, right? Romeo was fighting against society. So this is internal and external conflict. Now moving to fifth point, chances and accident. Now chances and accidents also plays a very important and significant role in Shakespeare's tragedy. Now chances here means probability. Now let's take Romeo and Juliet. at last we all know the ending of Romeo and Juliet, that Juliet took a magic juice and she was unconscious, and the plan was that Romeo will come and take her with him, but Romeo didn't got the message of that priest, that Juliet has took a magic juice and you will have to come to receive her, but he believed that Juliet is died. So this is nothing but a chance or an accident. For example, imagine what if Romeo had got the message of that priest and the thing has gone as planned. So the ending might have got something different. Or also assume that what if Juliet had waked up a minute sooner, right? So this is nothing but chances and probabilities. In Othello also we can see chances and probability. Iago, the antagonist of the play, asks or tries to convince his wife Emilia to bring the handkerchief of Desdemona, which is actually a love symbol between Othello and Desdemona, and Emilia very surprisingly find that love symbol, that handkerchief, fallen on the floor. So this is nothing but a chance, right? Now, sixth characteristics, element of love. Now, Shakespeare also introduces the element of love into his tragedy. We can find there is love between Othello and Desdemona. We can find there is love between Romeo and Juliet. So he very nicely introduced the element of love, and in the midst of this element of love, he also focuses on the tragedy. In the midst of this love, there is tragic elements which arises tragedy in the play, right? Seventh point, one key figure. Now I told earlier that in Shakespeare's tragedy there is only one key figure. If we will see the modern tragedies, then all the major and minor characters will have their own roles, but in Shakespeare's tragedy the whole plot will revolve around one person. In Othello, the whole plot is revolving around Othello, right? In King Lear, the whole plot is revolving around the protagonist King Lear. So in Shakespeare's tragedy there would be one key figure, only one main hero, and the plot would be around this key figure, right? 8 point, high status of the hero. This is also a repeating point where Shakespeare, I earlier told that Shakespeare mostly focuses on the upper class people, the high status of the people, right? All the characters in the Shakespearean tragedy we will find are, they have their own social status. Othello was a general, army general. Romeo and Juliet belonged to an upper class family. King Lear himself was a king. So this shows the high status of the hero or the protagonist or the characters. So this was all about Shakespeare's characteristics. So thank you guys for watching my video, and have a good day. Thank you once again.